Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar. I'm Ryan Evans with the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And if this is your first time joining us, our center hosts a webinar pretty much every Thursday over this noon central hour. And you can find a full schedule of that and a lot more on our center's website. That's going to be cap.unl.edu, cap.unl.edu. And today, we are excited to be looking at issues related to legal restrictions and foreign land ownership in the U.S., as several states are now adopting new laws that are restricting some foreign entities from purchasing land near U.S. military installations, which is a move aimed at bolstering national security. And here in Nebraska, the legislature just enacted two such laws during this year's session. So today, the webinar hopes to provide an analysis of these new Nebraska laws and their implications, while also exploring potential legislative actions at the federal level regarding this issue. And to present, we're really glad to have Dave Aiken back. Dave Aiken is a professor and agricultural law and water law specialist with our Center for Ag Profitability and Nebraska Extension. So Dave, I will turn it over to you, and I'll also invite anybody to submit questions as they come up. Just type those into the Q&A box or in the chat, and Dave can address those at the end of the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Tell me when the screen's up.
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, well, this alien land ownership has been a very controversial issue over the last couple of years. And we've seen some significant action this year in the unicameral to address the issue. And so what we're going to do is take a look at these changes. We're going to start out with a little background in terms of what's on the books at the federal level regarding monitoring and, in some cases, limiting or regulating foreign investments in the United States, including investments in land. Then we'll take a look at the two statutes that we have in Nebraska. The first one, which generally revised and updated the 1889 laws that we have that are still on the books regarding alien land ownership. And then we'll take a look at the second bill, which deals specifically with the issue of purchase of land by foreign persons near military installations in Nebraska. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a separate federal program that's going on that tries to shine a light on some of the legal entities that may be a cover or a shield for criminal interests or foreign adversaries or something like that. And so we'll talk about that and the role that might play down the road in terms of helping deal with this challenge. Okay, just for a little background, according to the most recent USDA report, approximately 3% of agricultural land in the U.S. is owned by foreign citizens, and approximately 1.73%, or just under 800,000 acres in Nebraska ag land is foreign owned, and that's 46 million acres of the 46. Let me back up. 800,000 in Nebraska acres are foreign owned, and that's out of the nearly 46 million total ag acres. That's cropland and pasture and forests is foreign owned. So that's what those numbers are all for. Okay, break down the 800,000 that are owned in Nebraska. Currently, at least from the most recent information, 19 acres owned by Chinese interests, and this would be land that originally was still owned by Syngenta Seeds, but Syngenta then was acquired by Chem China, so those 19 acres became owned by the Chinese. when they acquired Syngenta seeds. And that's a very, very small percentage of all ag land, and a little bit larger, but still quite small percentage of foreign-owned ag land in Nebraska. 77 acres are owned by people from Hong Kong, and that's like what, 1/100th of 1%. So that's, and then 125 acres, but Hong Kong, of course, now is part of China, although there's still some political issues in terms of, how Hong Kong can govern itself within the Chinese system, that kind of thing. So that would be, 96 acres between the Chinese and the Hong Kong acres. 125 acres owned by Iranians. They're on the foreign adversary list. But about 75% of all the foreign-owned ag land in Nebraska is owned by Canadians. And one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that international treaties between the United States and other countries may give citizens in that country the right to acquire land or property in the United States, as long as American citizens have similar rights in that country. And so where that has happened, and clearly it's happened with Canada, but I'm sure there are other treaties where this is established as well, then that treaty would take precedence over our state restrictions, our state property, land ownership restrictions. Okay, this is just a map from the USDA report that shows the percentage of land owned in all the states, state by state, by foreign entities or individuals. And so the tan kind of, or the canvas, whatever color that is the largest, 2.4% or more. Nebraska, we're 1.73, so we're just barely made it into the yellow category. So that's why we're yellow. And then smaller categories of, Iowa and Missouri would be in the smaller categories, and then blue, I guess there's some in New England, be the smallest in Puerto Rico. So anyway, that gives an idea, but 3% for the United States as a whole, so that there's not a lot of, it's a small percentage, but it doesn't mean that it's not anything to be concerned about. And states have taken steps to deal with this. Then you can see this in the two maps. This comes from the National Ag Law Center in Arkansas. Great information, great source of ag law information. And this is one of the issues they've been tracking down there. And the red states are the states that have prohibitions on foreign ownership of land or agricultural land. And so you can see in 2022, there's 14, I think, in that in the red category. Nebraska is one of those. Then in 2023, it went from 14 to 24. So 10 more states prohibited or established some limits on foreign ownership of either ag land or all land within the state. So that's a trend, and there's probably a few more states that have done it this year in 2024, but you don't have that information yet. Okay, in terms of federal law, the one that we may know a little bit about or be a little bit familiar about, it's the Ag Foreign Investment Disclosure Act. And this is administered through USDA, and the law requires people from other countries who acquire land or leases in agricultural land in the United States, they have to file a form FSA 153 with the local FSA office where the land is located. And that is the information that the USDA uses to prepare those reports in terms of, 3% of ag land is foreign owned. That's where that 3% number came from. And USDA and Congress are both looking at ways that this program can be revised and improved to make it easier to keep up to date and more accurate. And for example, at Congress in 2022 said that told USDA they needed to be able to put this all online and allow the forms to be submitted online so that it's easier, so that hopefully more people will file and that there'll be an online website by 2026. If not, if they don't get it done, that's when it's required. Might happen before then, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see on that. But it give you the opportunity to go in and do some searching and that type of thing. Now, this law and all the laws we're talking about, assuming that people are being honest, that they're not trying to cheat, and so that when foreign people are attempting to purchase land in Nebraska or within the United States, their advisors are telling them, look, if it's ag land, then you've got to file this. We'll file this form for you, so that you're on record as being a foreign owner of this land in Nebraska or wherever it might be. We assume that everybody is trying to play by the rules. However, life tells us that not everybody plays by the rules. There are lots of people who want to cheat if they think they can get away with it. And so we don't know if we're getting all the people filing this information that are supposed to be filing it. We hope that most of them do, but we can't guarantee that they all do. And this relates to the very last point, the Corporate Transparency Act, which we'll talk about at the end. Okay, the next law, the second federal law that we'll talk about is the main one in terms of trying to protect national security resources in the United States. And this is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And I think it's CAFIAS, or I'm not sure how you pronounce the acronym, but that's what it is. And it's basically it reviews the implications of either foreign investments, like purchases of companies, for example, in the United States, or the purchase of land in the United States, to see if there's any if there's any national security interests that could be compromised by this, or that could be impacted by this in some way. And they can say, you can't do it, or they can recommend to the president that the president prohibit it, or they can say, you can do this, but there's some things that we're concerned about, so we're going to have you prepare what is called a national security agreement, where you agree not to do certain things, to allow us to come in and periodically inspect your operation, not to install certain types of equipment, make sure that all the IT equipment is sourced from the United States companies, so that there's not, chips or other things in there that could pose some type of national security threat, or whatever it might be. And so, initial focus was on, certain technology, defense technology and computer technology, critical infrastructure, but now, and military installations, of course. Now they also look at ports, airports, other critical infrastructure, and that type of thing. So, again, this kind of operates on the honor system, in the sense that they assume that, and this probably happens most of the time, that the people, like the law firms, for example, the American law firms who are advising these companies, who are helping them with their transactions in the United States, saying, okay, we're going to have to notify CAFIAS, and fill out their form, so that they know this is happening. So if they have any any concerns, whatever. But this is, something that you need to be aware of. And it's part of our law, and we'll help you do what you need to do to comply with that. But so, when you hear about, defense technology or something like that being debated in terms of, whether foreign countries should be acquiring this technology or acquiring the company that makes this technology or whatever, this is the program that deals with that. Okay. As I mentioned, this is, concerns about especially Chinese land acquisitions near military installations has generated a lot of congressional interest and some congressional action, although it's not final action yet. I mean, we've had some things done in the House, but not the Senate, and some things done in the Senate, but not yet in the House. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the stuff get wrapped up in appropriation bills that are annual appropriation bills that are kind of making their way through Congress. Senate adopted a bill in 2024 prohibiting what I refer to as the big four foreign adversaries. That's China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, from purchasing land in the United States, and that would be an amendment to the CAFISIS law. The Ag Committee in the House adopted a appropriation bill rider that directs the USDA to block farmland purchases by the big four. This hasn't been passed yet, but it'd be, that would be a big step, going from the information gathering stuff to saying no. If USDA finds out that one of the big four are trying to acquire farmland in the U.S., the USDA can block it, or however it might be set up. Okay, those are just a couple that jumped out at me. There are a lot of others, and again, some of this may end up in the Farm Bill. Some of this may end up in the 2024 appropriation bills, and so we're just going to have to kind of continue to monitor this. But it is something that there is an active interest in Congress. Okay, back to Nebraska. As I mentioned earlier, for a long time, since 1889, Nebraska has banned aliens, that is most non-citizens of the United States, and foreign corporations, which if somebody has a question about that, I'll be happy to talk about that, prohibits them from owning or leasing land in Nebraska. And the one exception, and it's a general exception, is that leases for up to 5 years are okay. Any lease over 5 years is prohibited. And so this is the basic law, and it's still the basic law in Nebraska. And even when all the amendments go into effect, this will still pretty much be the fundamental alien ownership law in Nebraska, which is a very broad prohibition, and applies to enemy aliens or foreign adversaries, but also to any other aliens, friendly, non-friendly, doesn't matter. And it includes all real estate in the state of Nebraska. So it could be land that's near from military installations, but also land that's far away from military installation. I mean, it's all land. This law, however, has, monitoring and enforcement are pretty, especially monitoring. I mean, once they know they have something to enforce, county attorneys can enforce that, but the monitoring provisions, there aren't any. And so, it basically relies on citizens to share concerns with county officials and then see what happens. Now, there are a number of exceptions, and these have been adopted over the years, some within the last 20 or 30 years. So some are relatively recent for a 100-year-old law. And they're oil and gas leases, then railroads, utilities, and common carriers, then land used for manufacturing or industry, and including petroleum products, storage, sales, or distribution. Then what I call the urban land exception, that's the land within cities and villages and within the within 3 miles of those municipal boundaries. Then there's some kind of transitional ones, land inherited by widows or heirs before March 1st, 1889, which was when the original law took effect. And that land had to be divested within 10 years. So all of that should have happened by March 1st, 1899, which would have been the 10 years from when that law took effect. And that's what I call the grandfather clause, and that's land acquired by aliens before March 1st, 1889, and that was not subject to a divestiture requirement. And then there's also what I call the debt collection exception. That is, if they very simply, if an alien was the lender, so to speak, in the broadest possible sense, not necessarily a bank, but just lender, and they foreclosed on the loan, and that foreclosure meant they ended up owning some land in Nebraska. They had 10 years to sell that land, and again, these exceptions have been around for a while. Some of them go all the way back to 1889, and then some of them are a little more recent. Now, the first law that we're going to look at is the one that came from the Pillen administration, and this was a comprehensive revision of the current alien ownership statutes in Nebraska. And it's pretty comprehensive, lots of changes. That's why we went through the provisions of the current law so that we understand a little bit better what the effect of the new law is, the LB 1301. And this law, like the current law, are statewide, and so there's nothing in this law dealing with military installations. Major changes is that citizens may report suspected violations to the Department of Agriculture or to the Nebraska Attorney General for investigation, and both of them are, when this law goes into effect, New Year's Day, January 1st, January 2025. When this law goes into effect, they both the Department of Ag and the Attorney General will have be able to investigate these any complaints or concerns that are reported by citizens to those agencies. So that doesn't take effect for a while, but it will be, when that happens, that will be a major change. I'm hoping that the agencies will be receptive to fielding these, concerns or reports from citizens or from, county officials or whomever it might be, a little bit ahead of time. But we'll just kind of have to wait to see how that plays out. Okay, the basic prohibition that aliens and the foreign corporations are prohibited from owning or leasing land, not just ag land, but any land in Nebraska, unless it falls under one of the exceptions. That stays in place, and so that fundamental principle going back to 1889 is unchanged. It applies to everybody, and to non-qualified aliens, and it's not limited to foreign adversaries, but it certainly applies to them. And it applies to all land that's not subject to one of these exemptions, like the oil and gas or whatever. But the exceptions have been changed, and basically there's fewer of them, and of the ones that are still around, some of them are qualified in an important way. Okay, so first of all, the LB 1301, this new law establishes some requirements that apply specifically to foreign adversaries. And these are the foreign adversaries identified by the State Department, I believe. But anyway, the current list is China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela. You may have seen on the news, the Russian warships that are visiting Cuba. After they're finished visiting Cuba, they're going to go on down and visit Venezuela. So they're going to make stops at two of the five on this foreign adversary list. Not a big surprise. Of course, Russia also on the foreign adversary list. So three of them involved in that. Anyway, so if any entity associated with or having any connection to any of the foreign adversaries are not entitled to three of the exemptions, and that's the oil and gas leases, and then the public utility, railroad, and common carrier land or land purchase for those purposes, and then an inherited land with 5-year divestiture. So the foreign adversary, for example, and somebody who's a resident of a foreign adversary inherits land, they don't get 5 years. They're subject to immediate divestiture. So that's so anyway, so those exemptions are not available to the foreign adversaries. In addition, there are two exemptions to which foreign adversaries are not entitled unless they have negotiated one of these national security agreements with CAFISIS, with the federal government that monitors foreign investments in the United States. And so that's the industrial land and the petroleum, products exemption, and then the urban, what I call the urban land exemption. Those two are exempt, but they are exempt only if the foreign adversaries have a signed national security agreement. And I would, so if they want to acquire land in a city or something like that, and they're not scared off by having to get this national security agreement, which a lot of them would be, because they know that's going to add months to their process of getting approved. They will. I'm assuming that the Nebraska officials, probably the Nebraska Attorney General or somebody from that office, will be involved in negotiating this national security agreement, because if the national security agreement doesn't address the concerns that Nebraska has regarding this, I mean, there's not much point in doing it. So anyway, that's not spelled out, but we can't tell the federal government what to do. But I'm assuming that there would be efforts at the federal level to cooperate with Nebraska in this process, so that we'll kind of we'll have to kind of see how that plays out. But that's very interesting. I think these two categories, the industrial and manufacturing and petroleum product exception, and then the urban land exception, those are the exceptions for which there would be the most or a lot of interest from foreign say businesses or companies or something like that. If they wanted to buy land in Nebraska, that's probably the land they would be most interested in buying. Not necessarily, but probably would be. So this national security agreement requirement is a very interesting way to deal with that. Because if people want to invest money in building manufacturing plants in Nebraska, creating jobs in Nebraska and stuff like that, we kind of want that to happen, but we don't want to compromise national security in the process. And so, this is, I think, provides a way to compromise this, and hopefully it'll play out that way. Okay. In addition to these changes to the original exemptions, there were three exemptions, and these are all I think go back to 1889. The three exemptions that were simply repealed because the time for compliance was a long time ago and stuff like that. So and those are ones that are not likely to have led to a national security concern. But anyway, those are all repealed. And all of this takes effect January 1st, 2025. Okay. Um, Under our current laws, uh, which are on the books until January 1st, 2025. Enforcement is the responsibility of the local county attorneys. And when they get the case, or when they get the information, and if the investigation bears out that there is a violation, then they have the tools to do what they need to do, the legal tools legally. But it's the investigation and bringing the information to the county attorney that may not have been uh, the most effective way to address this issue. And what LB 1301 does is that it says they can bring these citizens can bring these concerns regarding violations or potential violations to the Department of Ag in Nebraska or to the Nebraska Attorney General. And so presumably they'll both have 800 numbers or numbers to call, where you can call, and or maybe they'll have something online where you go and fill out a form and submit a form online. Who knows how they're going to do it, but they probably will have that all worked out until pretty close to the New Year's Day, 2025. But anyway, that will facilitate people filing concerns, and there are going to be concerns that are kind of things that people file that are some people will just do it to be uncooperative, that crank things. Some people will try to get somebody they don't like in trouble, and that kind of thing. But there will be some wheat in there. There may be wheat in there with the chaff. There may be some legitimate concerns about foreign ownership, and the Ag Department looks like it will be probably carrying out the bulk of the investigations, and that they will be. And so they'll be checking this out to see whether there's a potential violation or not. And it's kind of interesting if when the Ag Department investigates the violations, if it says that there's a violation, they can refer it to the Attorney General for prosecution. If the Attorney General says no, there's not a case here, the Ag Department has the option of hiring an outside counsel to take the case for the state of Nebraska if the Attorney General says no, I'm not going to do it. So there's so make of that what you will. But that's very interesting. If there's cases and there's a disagreement at the administrative level in terms of between the Ag Department and the Attorney General in terms of whether there's a violation or not, the Ag Department says yes and the Attorney General says no, the Ag Department can go ahead, hire an attorney to do what the Attorney General's office would have done, and basically act, representing the Department of Ag to prosecute that violation. And if they find that there are violations, then they can do, and then they can go to court to, well, excuse me, not necessarily go to court. They can begin legal proceedings to say you've got to divest this property, and you got to divest it within 30 days. And if the companies, if the people say, okay, we'll agree to divest, then they have, I think, up to 180 days to divest. But if they don't, if they don't agree to do it, then it's 30 days. And if they don't do it in 30 days, then they go to court. And the Attorney General can also say if there's something he thinks that CAFISIS needs to be aware of or needs to be brought in on, the Nebraska Attorney General can do that as well. So this is a pretty substantial change and updating to our foreign ownership restriction laws in Nebraska. They are much strengthened and will be, I believe, much more effectively administered if citizens share information with the state of Nebraska and that. So, in summary, 1301, which is the most complicated of the two bills. The basic prohibition is still there. And it's been there for a long time, but we're going to be in a better position to enforce that, to monitor and enforce that now. There are fewer exceptions. Foreign adversaries have to jump through the national security agreement hoop for the urban or the industrial to qualify for either one of those exceptions. And if they don't want to do that, then those exemptions are closed to them. Monitoring enforcement, I think, is one of the biggest improvements in the program coming from 1301. And so people can share, citizens and county officials, anybody, can share concerns with the Ag Department or the Attorney General, and they'll be investigated. This law has a foreign adversary focus, as we've seen throughout several provisions, but there's no particular military installation focus because it's focusing on all land in Nebraska. So there's that summary. Then we have the second bill. Excuse me. And this comes from Senator Hardin of Gering out in the Panhandle, and it's 1120. And there was, apparently one or more people, according to the stories, had suitcases of cash, and they were going around and buying land in the Panhandle for 3 or 4 times its current market value. And so you're buying acres of land anywhere in Nebraska, that's thousands of dollars per acre. And if you're buying very many of those acres, that's very many thousands of dollars. And, so that's a lot of cash. A very interesting story. Anyway, raised concerns that this land was being acquired for foreign adversaries for nefarious purposes, to compromise or threaten the national security of the United States, because we have the intercontinental ballistic missile fields in the Panhandle along in Colorado and Wyoming. So under 1120, this bill supplements 1310. The bills are not in conflict, but this one says that if anybody buys land within a certain area of certain military installations, and the map's on the next screen, so you'll see the map, then they have to sign a sworn statement that they have no connection to any foreign adversary. And these are the 5 foreign adversaries that we saw in 1310. And the land that is affected by this sworn statement requirement is land that is federally defined as covered lands. And again, that's what the map's for, near these military installations, airports, seaports, all sorts of things. But we're just interested in Nebraska because this law only applies to Nebraska. But these are the counties and the Panhandle that are covered by this. It does not cover Offutt Air Force Base, and that was a deliberate decision made by Senator Hardin. Apparently, I'm not sure why they except in a highly urbanized area, in Sarpy County, didn't know if it would work but I mean, this is something that could, down the road, the law could be extended to include Offutt Air Force Base if it becomes apparent in the future that would be a useful or a necessary type of thing to do. But it doesn't 1120 doesn't take that step, but it the model is there now, and so if we need to extend it, to Sarpy County, it could be extended. Okay, here's the map. And so, and you can see the other, colored areas, in other states. But that is a big chunk. The ICBM missile fields, again, in Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming. So that's the area where it would be, and it's the description is very specific. So the states that are caught up, it tells with legal descriptions and stuff what's in it and what's not in and stuff like that. So that's there's a way to know what's the area does this requirement apply to. And so this sworn written document, and it's called an affidavit. It has to be filed with the recorder of deeds, and it has to be properly filled out and filed before the deed to the buyer, who wants to become the new owner. It can't be recorded until this deed has been filed, has been filled out and properly filed. And then a copy is sent to the Attorney General's office, so that they're in the loop. And this one takes effect this summer, next month, actually. Not 30, 4 days or 5 days from now. So that one will go into effect not too quickly. And if there's, well, it's going to be a challenge to violate this because if the land is going to be sold and it's in that that kind of orange area on the map, the counties that are part of that orange area are going to know, who needs to have an affidavit and who doesn't. What land is inside the orange area and what land is outside the orange area. They're going to know that. So if they don't get the affidavit, they say, we can't file this until you sign this. And but again, if people have concerns that people are asking about buying land that seems suspicious or something like that, I'd go ahead and notify the ag department of the Attorney General's office. And even though the law is not in effect until January, and I don't know this, obviously, I obviously cannot speak for them, but I would think that they would probably be interested in the information. And I'll just leave it at that. So, but that's what it is. You have to sign it, and if you falsely sign it and you say that there's no affiliation, it turns out there is an affiliation, that's you've committed a crime. I apologize. I didn't look up to see what the penalty would be, but I suspect there's at least a possibility of jail time for violations. So that's that is a serious deal. Now, the last topic, very quickly, that we need to talk about are these so-called shell companies. And the shell companies are where they're set up, and the paperwork all looks good, and the names on the paper are all they're all legal stuff, legal people. I mean, not criminals or representatives of foreign adversaries or anything like that. But they may be hidden in these behind a series of shell companies or something like that. And this is a global problem. Money laundering is one of the things that these shell companies are used for, to take money from say drug trafficking or something like that, and then try to turn that into what appears to be legal money that can be used for legal purposes without somebody getting in trouble for drug trafficking. So, and the approach that is used is that they want to find out how to open up these shell companies and see who are the people really involved. And and most industrialized countries have done this. The United States is one of the was one of the last to do it, but we did it in 2021 with the Corporate Transparency Act, and so it requires corporations and other limited liability business entities to register with the Treasury Department and provide information regarding people who are playing a major role in the business. And we've already had a seminar on this earlier in the year. It applies to mom and pop, corporations, family farm corporations, everybody that, anybody that's a corporation or a limited liability company or whatever has to file this information with the Treasury Department. There are exceptions, but they're for companies that are traded on the stock exchange or Wall Street, investment banks and stuff like that, because the Treasury Department already has this information for those larger financial and business entities. It's the more Main Street, more mom and pop, smaller businesses that are not up to now had not been required to file this information with the Treasury Department, but now they do. Right now things are a little bit confused. A federal judge in Alabama said the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional and illegal, and so some people are advising their clients not to file this information. However, the Treasury Department is saying, "Hey, if you're not part of this lawsuit in Alabama, you still have to file, and you have to file, by January 1st, 2025." So if you haven't filed yet, contact your attorney or your whoever does your taxes, your accountant, and they can help you with this. It's very simple. It's not, you don't have to. They don't need social security numbers and stuff like that for individuals. It's just they want to know, are there real people in this business or is this a shell company? That's basically what they want to know. So they get the information that they think will give them the answer to that. So that's what that's about. And that would help a lot down the road when this thing gets up and running in terms of the beneficial ownership registry itself is functioning and the information's in and so forth. That information then will be available to law enforcement, including Nebraska Attorney General, to see if this company that's trying to buy that looks kind of fishy, that's trying to buy this land out in the Panhandle, whether they are who they say they are, or whether they are a front for a foreign adversary. So this is this is an important piece of the puzzle, and to make this work, we're going to need something like this to help see if get behind the people who say no, we're legit, but they don't smell legit or sound legit. Then you can check them out and see whether they're who they say they are or not. Okay. In conclusion, the monitoring and the agency investigation, that's a game changer, I think, in terms of the effectiveness of the enforcing alien ownership land restrictions in Nebraska. The beneficial ownership registry is going to be a big help, helping to get behind some of these companies to see whether the companies are fake or whether they're legitimate, whether they're a front for organized crime or enemy adversaries, or whether they're legitimate businesses. So we'll see how this goes, but citizens are going to have the opportunity to participate, and it's important that they do, because the Ag Department isn't going to know who to investigate unless people say, this is going on and we think it's kind of fishy. So that's what it's going to be like when these programs roll out in January, and hopefully they will help us get a much better handle on this alien ownership of land in Nebraska. Okay, thank you, and I will turn it back to Ryan.
Thanks, Dave. Great work. We invite you to submit questions if you have them in the Q&A panel in Zoom. We've got about a little under 10 minutes until our hour is up. And Dave, we do have a couple in that I'll go ahead and ask you here, so people have time to get theirs in if they indeed want to ask you something. So first up, it came early on in the presentation, a question asking if the nearly 8,000 acres in Nebraska in the Foreign Investment Disclosure Act report are actually owned, or does it include land controlled by foreign individuals and entities, if you have an idea about that?
Yeah, I do not know. That's a great question, and but that's just out of the table in the most recent USDA report on this, and so I just grabbed the number because I wanted to give some idea in terms of what the situation is in Nebraska. But I'm sure they in the report they explain what the different categories are and stuff like that. But I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and that person followed up by saying they're specifically asking because wind leases and easements are reported under the Ag Foreign Investment Disclosure Act if the wind developer has foreign interests, but the rights are limited to placement of a wind turbine, maybe on 1 to 2 acres per turbine, while the easement is on the full parcel. So that's why he was interested in that question. Another question, which I believe this came in right before you may have covered it. Perhaps you could just review, are the big four still blacklisted from the land owning exceptions?
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll answer that one, and then I'll jump back to the wind and solar for a little bit. The basic answer is yes, but it's not an absolute prohibition. They can acquire the urban land or the industrial land if they get the federal national security agreements signed. And I would expect if Nebraska officials are satisfied with the provisions in the national security agreement. If they don't have the national security, if they can't get the national security agreement, then yes, they are basically prohibited. So whether they can legally acquire land, and this is legally acquire land as opposed to illegally acquire land through a straw man or something like that. And so they basically are limited. Excuse me. And so that's pretty much across the board. Now, going to the wind and solar, this is a huge can of worms. I know that there were some big headlines earlier in the year about all the number of people who were registering under the USDA, ag land registration process for their wind leases and solar leases. If you read the existing law strictly, in my opinion, if you are a United States business entity that is not set up in the state of Nebraska, you are a foreign corporation or a foreign business entity. And so under that law, you're prohibited, except for leases of up to 5 years. But I would presume that that's only one lease of up to 5 years. And now in terms of the foreign, it would depend, I guess, on, well, they're the ones that have filed and they've got on, but it turns out that they're that it's not ownership of land, but they're just, negotiated the right to pursue the development of the wind farm or the solar farm or whatever it might be excuse me, if everything else works out. They'll run into a problem if they don't get it done within 5 years, and a lot of these projects are going to be longer than that. And so then, they're going to run up against an issue like that in Nebraska. And I think that, frankly, I was a little bit disappointed that they didn't look at the renewable energy issue, because I think it's it's the big issue in terms of foreign interest in farmland in Nebraska. It's for it's for wind farms and solar farms, and so that's but you can't do everything all at once. I'm not saying the legislature made a mistake. I just said that this is an unresolved issue that is going to have to be addressed sometime down the road, and I hope that it will be. But I think once January 2025 rolls around and people start saying, people who don't want a wind farm next door are going to be saying, hey, they're going to be complaining to the ag department or the attorney general, saying these guys are building a wind farm, and I don't know if they have the right to do that in Nebraska, and it needs to be checked out. And so that's the kerfuffle that I see happening down the road, and that'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out.
All right, thanks, Dave. Thanks for the questions, everybody. We'll go ahead and close out. If anybody wants to get in a last minute one, you have a couple of minutes here. But I want to thank again Professor Dave Aiken for a presentation today. This recording and his slides will be available. I put that address in the chat. They'll be available on the webinar page for the Center for Ag Profitability on our website. That's cap.unl.edu/webinars. Those should be up in the next day or so. And when you close out today, you'll have a brief survey that you're presented with. If you can take just a minute to fill that out, we really appreciate your feedback on these. And as always, please get a hold of us if you have any suggestions or requests for things you would like to see covered in these webinars. So with that, Dave, seeing no other questions, and certainly people can get in touch with you after if they do have something that comes to mind. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And thanks everybody for attending today. And we will plan to see you next Thursday at noon here for a look at programs through the Nebraska Department of Agriculture for new and beginning farmers and some succession programs. So please do tune in for that next Thursday at noon. And Dave, thanks again for a great presentation.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right. Have a good week, everyone.